The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. Not because I had somewhere to be that early, but because, after months of planning, writing checks, signing contracts, and quietly biting my tongue through every passive-aggressive suggestion from my granddaughter's future in-laws, my body had forgotten how to rest. As the light slipped through the blinds and pooled at the foot of the bed, I sat up and told myself, just get through today. Not because I wasn't proud, of course I was, but because something in my gut had been twisting for weeks, something I'd been too polite to name. When I stepped into the kitchen and saw the empty coffee pot and the silence that followed me like a second skin, I realized I hadn't been invited to the bridal breakfast, hadn't been asked to get ready with the girls, hadn't even been texted a location or time for hair and makeup, and I was the grandmother of the bride, the woman footing the bill, the one who pulled money from an old insurance payout and 3 savings accounts to make sure this day happened without a hitch. And yet somehow, I was already forgotten, like a backstage hand in someone else's play. So I poured myself some tea, sat at the window, and watched the city wake up while my own blood got dressed in silk robes and matching slippers somewhere else. Around 10, I finally received the itinerary, not from my granddaughter, but from her cousin, who said, just FYI, we moved some things around. Like I was an afterthought. Like I was lucky to be included at all. Still, I got dressed deliberately. In a navy blue dress I had saved for this very day. My late husband's gold pin on the collar. My hair curled soft like I used to wear it on Sundays when we'd dance to the old records and laugh without needing a reason. I rode to the venue in silence, watching the trees blur past the window, thinking about the years I spent pouring myself into this family. The holidays hosted, the birthdays remembered, the emergencies handled, the unconditional love that came with no receipt, no invoice, no limit. When I arrived at the country club and stepped into the banquet hall, so bright, so white, so carefully curated, I spotted the seating chart on an easel by the door and walked over, eyes scanning the gold calligraphy for my name. And there it was, tucked in the corner near the back table, a folded place card that read in bold font, "The old lady paying for everything." I stood there for a second, blinking, not sure if I'd read it right, not sure if I was the butt of a joke or the ghost of the guest list. No one said anything, not the planner, not the cousins standing nearby, not even my granddaughter who breezed past in tulle and perfume, shouting about centerpieces. So I picked up the card, turned it over in my hands, and felt something old inside me go quiet. The part of me that had always made excuses, always swallowed slights in favor of peace. In that stillness, I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even ask who thought this was funny. I just placed the card in my purse, turned on my heel, and walked toward the nearest chair, because something had shifted, and by the end of that day, they were all going to feel it. I sat through the ceremony like a statue in silk, clapping when I was supposed to, smiling for photos when summoned, but inside I was cataloging every micro-expression, every moment of silence that used to mean something and now meant nothing at all. And when they said family table, I realized that didn't mean me, not really, because I was placed near the exit with the plus ones and co-workers, a polite way of saying we want your money but not your presence. And as the pastor spoke about unity and respect and the sacred bonds of generational love, I thought about the time I held my granddaughter's hand through her first heartbreak, how I let her sleep in my bed when she thought monsters lived under her own, how I snuck her extra cookies when her mama said no, and now she couldn't even look me in the eye when the photographer asked for a shot with the important women in her life, and I wasn't mad yet, not fully, just stunned, like a person watching their name erased from a ledger they built line by line. And during cocktail hour, I overheard someone laugh and say, "That's the one who paid for the dress," like I was a sponsor, not blood, like I was a corporate donor and not the woman who made the bride's baby blanket by hand in 1997. When dinner was finally served, they brought out the wine and raised glasses to toast the future, and I sipped water from a plastic cup because nobody had bothered to ask if I still drank red or white. And the maid of honor gave a speech that included a thank you to the hotel coordinator, the florist, the makeup artist, even the DJ, but skipped right over the woman who covered the catering deposit and bought the custom cake. And I knew then that this wasn't just thoughtlessness, it was erasure dressed in blush tones and filtered photos. And so I sat there with my hands folded, watching it all unfold, a performance of gratitude with no script for me. And when the dancing started, I excused myself and walked out to the garden, away from the noise, into the quiet where I could think, where the wind still had manners and the roses bloomed without needing praise. And I sat on a bench under a string of fairy lights and thought, what would your grandfather say if he saw this? And I knew the answer. He'd say, baby, you've given them everything. It's time to give yourself something. And that's when the idea started to form, quiet but certain, the way storms do before they break. And I didn't cry, didn't shake, didn't storm back into the hall demanding respect. I just sat with the idea, fed it with every ignored moment, every clipped sentence, every time someone smiled at me while pocketing my sacrifice. And when I finally stood up, brushed off my dress, and made my way back inside, it wasn't with the posture of a forgotten guest. It was with the spine of a woman who remembered her worth. And they wouldn't see it coming, not yet. But by the time the honeymoon was over, they'd know exactly who they had mistaken for a relic, and they'd learn what happens when the woman who funded the fairy tale rewrites the ending without asking permission. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind of clear that doesn't wait for validation, doesn't ask if it's being too harsh, too cold, too bitter, because it knows the cost of silence, knows what it means to trade dignity for a seat at a table built on entitlement. And I poured my coffee slow, watching the steam curl like a question I was finally ready to answer. And when I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where my granddaughter used to eat scrambled eggs with jelly toast and asked me to braid her hair, I opened my checkbook, my laptop, and the thick wedding folder I'd been keeping for months, neatly labeled with every invoice, every receipt, every proof that I had paid for nearly every inch of that wedding, from the monogram napkins to the damn portable heaters for the outdoor reception tent. And I didn't feel rage, not the hot kind. I felt something better, sharper, more precise, resolve. And by noon, I had called the wedding planner and asked for copies of the final budget, called the country club and asked for a receipt in my name, called my lawyer and asked if we could revisit the terms of the gift I had been advised to give instead of a contract. And bless her, Monica didn't even ask why. She just said, I'll be at your house by 3. And when she arrived in her navy blazer and sensible heels, she looked at me the way women look at each other when they've both survived being thanked for their sacrifices, with silence. And I handed her the folder and said, I'm not trying to ruin her marriage. I just want to make sure they remember who built their fairy tale. Monica nodded, flipped through the pages and said, we'll start with the venue. Technically, if you paid the deposit and signed the contract, you're still the official host. That gives us leverage. And I didn't flinch, because I wasn't bluffing, wasn't being petty. I was being exact, being careful, being done. And that week, while they posted honeymoon photos from a beach I'd never seen, clinking champagne glasses and hashtagging love like it was currency, I filed the paperwork to retract my name from the vendor thank you list and quietly contacted the wedding website's registrar to remove my contact information from the RSVP archive. And every night I went to bed knowing I hadn't lost my temper, hadn't yelled, hadn't burned bridges. I was simply locking doors I used to leave wide open for people who never learned to knock. And when my granddaughter called the following Friday, her voice sweet and sticky like old tea, saying, Grandma, I hope you had a good time at the wedding. I'm sorry if you felt left out. Things were just hectic. I didn't match her energy, didn't soothe her guilt with grace she hadn't earned. I just said, thank you for the update, and let the silence do the rest. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is not beg to be seen, but to make sure her absence echoes louder than her presence ever did. And that weekend, while they celebrated being Mr. and Mrs., I celebrated too, with a glass of wine, a lawyer on retainer, and the growing sense that maybe it wasn't too late to teach this family exactly what it cost to forget the woman who made the meal every holiday, paid every overdue bill without asking, and still brought pie to people who never once asked if she'd eaten. By the end of that month, the shift was complete. Not loud, not theatrical, just firm, deliberate, the way tectonic plates move beneath the surface until suddenly the whole map has changed. And I started by closing the account I'd opened for wedding expenses, the one I'd kept separate from my retirement so I could track every dollar without confusing myself. And as I sat with the bank manager reviewing transactions, he looked up and said, Seems like you were very generous. And I just nodded. Generous, yes, but no longer naive. And the next thing I did was draft a new financial plan, one that included travel, not for family reunions or holiday flights, but for me, solo, intentional, free. And while they were still uploading edited wedding photos with captions like, "Forever starts now," I was booking a room in Savannah for a weekend retreat hosted by a group of women over 60 who didn't tolerate disrespect, rap, and glitter. And the best part was, I didn't tell anyone, didn't post it, didn't announce it. I just went, walked along the cobblestone streets with the wind in my scarf, and nobody calling me the old lady paying for everything, just people who saw me as a woman, full stop. When I returned home, refreshed, sun-warmed, a little pink from too much sweet tea and not enough sunscreen, there was a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, my granddaughter's cursive all too familiar, and inside was a thank you card that said, "We are so grateful for your support." No specifics, no acknowledgement of the name card, no apology, just performative gratitude packaged in floral cardstock. And I held it for a long time before sliding it into a drawer with the rest of the things I didn't need to display, because I had learned by now that some people will rewrite the story no matter how it happened, and you can either argue the facts or walk away from the table altogether. And I had chosen the latter. Had chosen to spend my Sunday mornings baking what I wanted, not what was expected. Had started bringing banana bread to the shelter down the road, where women called me Miss E and smiled like they meant it, where nobody asked for money, just time, presence, warmth, and I gave it gladly, because it felt like mine to give, not something being siphoned out of obligation. And one afternoon, as I was leaving the center, a young woman named Clara tapped my arm and said, "You remind me of my grandma. She used to say, 'Don't let them spend your kindness like it's theirs.'" And I nearly teared up right there in the hallway, because I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that, to name what had happened, to validate that what I gave wasn't just money, it was identity, years, stories. And I was finally done handing that over to people who thought a seat at the reception table was all I needed. And that night, I brewed a pot of mint tea, curled up in the armchair by the window, and wrote a letter of my own, not to her, not to the family, but to myself. A list of everything I'd reclaimed since that name tag moment, starting with my peace and ending with my future. And I signed it, not with love or forgiveness or even closure, but with the simple, unwavering truth. You are not a prop in someone else's celebration. You are the foundation they tried to decorate without ever thinking, and you don't owe them a single brick more. The real turning point came 2 weeks later, when I received a call from the country club's billing office, a routine follow-up. The woman on the other end, cheerful and oblivious, asking if I'd like to confirm the forwarding address for the remaining invoice tied to the floral upgrade the bride insisted on the week before the wedding. And I paused, let that silence stretch long enough to mean something, then said, "Actually, I won't be covering anything further." And the woman stammered, confused. "But ma'am, your name is still listed as the financial guarantor." And I said, "Then please update the file immediately." And I hung up without offering a justification, because I didn't owe one, not anymore. And the next day I sent Monica a copy of the revised invoice, along with a note that simply read, "Let's ensure they remember the word gift is not a blank check." And Monica, bless her, responded with a single sentence, "Already drafting the notice." And that was the first time I laughed in weeks, really laughed, the kind that starts in your stomach and rolls out in waves, not because of spite, but because I was finally spending my power on myself. When the message came from my granddaughter later that evening, a soft, "Hey Grandma, just checking in, hope all is well," I didn't even blink, didn't take the bait, didn't allow guilt to sneak in through the side door like it used to. I just left it on read. Because we're too old to be grateful for crumbs from people we once fed with both hands. And that weekend I went shopping for myself, not gifts, not outfits for someone else's event, just me. Found a long linen skirt, a cardigan, the color of honey, and a pair of sandals that made me feel like the kind of woman who takes her time, not the kind who's rushed to the back of the room because she's outlived her usefulness. And when I walked out of that store carrying my own bags, I thought about all the times I'd waited by the phone for an invitation, a thank you, an acknowledgement that never came. And I whispered to myself, no more, not as a threat, but as a promise, a vow to the girl I used to be before I learned to hide her behind casseroles and bridal checks. And when Sunday came, and the whole family gathered for a post-wedding brunch without me. Apparently I deserved a break. I brewed my coffee, lit my candle, and wrote in my journal. Not about them, but about the garden I'd started on my balcony, how the mint was thriving, how the lavender finally bloomed, how my peace felt like a room I'd unlocked and could finally walk around in barefoot. And that night, when I got a voicemail from my granddaughter saying, "I hope you're not upset, we just didn't want to stress you out," I deleted it without listening to the end, because by now I understood something they never had. Protecting your peace isn't petty, it's sacred. And I wasn't about to hand mine over to people who needed me silent to feel successful. By the start of spring, the facade was cracking, not mine, theirs, because a wedding is only glitter for so long before the glue peels back and the truth shows through, and I began hearing things, not from the family, who still spoke to me in half smiles and obligation, but from neighbors, whispers, that the newlyweds were struggling with bills, that the honeymoon photos didn't reflect the reality of a second credit card opened in my granddaughter's name, that the florist never got paid in full, that the DJ had sent 2 follow-up emails with polite reminders and rising frustration, and I didn't rejoice in it. I'm too old for petty joy, but I did feel something settle, something long overdue, like the moment you stop blaming yourself for how someone else mismanages your generosity. And I spent those days tending to my little balcony garden, the mint full and wild now, the rosemary fragrant and defiant, and as I clipped a few stems for tea, I thought about legacy, not the kind that's carved in stone or plastered on plaques, but the quiet kind, the kind that lives in the decisions you make when no one's watching. That's when I called Monica again, asked her to send me a copy of the preliminary paperwork for the living trust we'd discussed but hadn't finalized, and when she asked if I wanted to include my granddaughter, I said no, not out of malice, but clarity, because what she'd shown me that day with the name tag wasn't just disrespect. It was a blueprint of how she saw me, as funding, not family, as decoration, not blood, and I wouldn't be part of that story any longer. And so we sat at my kitchen table again, 2 women, 2 mugs of chamomile, and we revised everything, took out the old clauses, inserted new ones, created a fund for women like me, grandmothers erased by their own line, called it the Matriarch's Grace Fund, and I smiled when I signed the final page, because I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about revenge, and restoring something that had been tipped too far in favor of the ungrateful. And later that evening, I received another message from my granddaughter, a longer one this time, apologizing for how things might have felt, still dodging, still dancing around the truth, and she said she wanted to come by, with photos from the wedding, to relive the joy. And I didn't answer right away. I let the message sit for a full day. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for thinking of me. I'm building something new right now. Best of luck." And I hit send without trembling, without doubting, because I was finally saying yes to myself. And that weekend I went down to the shelter to deliver tea and muffins, and one of the residents, a woman named Janice, looked at me and said, "You've got that glow." And I smiled and said, "That's what it looks like when you stop pouring into people who refuse to hold a cup." And that night, back at home, I lit a candle, wrapped myself in my favorite shawl, and watched a movie alone, not out of loneliness, but liberation. And when the credits rolled, I didn't cry, I didn't yearn, I just sat there, whole, rooted, and blooming in the peace they thought I would never choose for myself. It was a Sunday afternoon when the final letter arrived, not handwritten like the first, but typed, professionally formatted, tucked in an envelope, with my granddaughter's new last name embossed on the return address like a crown she hadn't yet earned. And inside was a formal request for clarification regarding estate expectations. A phrase so polished it almost slipped past me until I read the sentence that followed. "Given your significant role in supporting the family event, we hoped to better understand how future distributions will be handled." And I sat with that letter for an hour, not out of confusion, but disbelief. Not at their nerve, because by now I knew better, but at their arrogance, at the way they still saw me as a resource, as a backup plan, as a purse with legs, and a memory too short to hold a grudge. And I didn't call Monica this time. Didn't need to, because my answer was already living in my actions, and instead I drafted my own reply, handwritten, simple, and final. "There will be no distributions. Consider your portion already spent at the reception," and I sealed it, stamped it, and sent it off with the kind of satisfaction that only comes when you know your silence is not weakness. It's proof of strength that doesn't need an audience, and for the first time in years, I truly felt free. Not out of anger, but alignment, because I was no longer tangled in their expectations, no longer calculating whether I should say yes to keep the peace, no longer praying that one day they'd wake up and treat me like more than a decorative obligation at the family table. And that week, instead of preparing for another holiday I wasn't invited to, I hosted a dinner at my home, a small one, just 6 women from the shelter and the community center, all over 60, all with stories like mine. Women who'd been sidelined, spoken over, used up, and discarded like seasoning after the meal was done, and we laughed. Really laughed, the kind that rises from the belly and breaks the walls down. And one of them, Pearl, said between bites of sweet potato casserole, "You know what's funny? They think when we stop giving, we disappear." And I raised my glass and said, "They forgot. We built the damn table." And we toasted with sparkling cider like queens at a coronation, not waiting for crowns to be handed down, but carving our own names into legacy. And later that night, I sat on my balcony watching the lights twinkle in the distance, my garden blooming quietly beside me, and I felt something click, something soft and immovable. I had finally outgrown the narrative they tried to keep me in, and I didn't need revenge or recognition, just distance and peace and my own 2 feet standing on ground I paid for and claimed in full. The last time I heard from my granddaughter was a cautious Facebook message that said, "I know you're upset, but I hope one day we can talk," and I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because silence had already said everything the name tag, the cropped-out photos, and their absence made clear. By then, the Matriarch's Grace Fund was up and running. We'd already helped 7 women like me, discarded but not defeated, and I spent my days helping them reclaim their power. One woman, Dolores, said, "I thought it was too late to start over," and I told her, "That's what they want you to think." That night, walking home, I knew my real legacy wasn't what I gave, it was what I built. When Easter came, I saw the family post their usual photo captioned, "Blessed," and I closed the app without a second thought. I didn't need their approval. I had finally chosen myself. Later, I saw my name etched into the community center's wall beneath the words, "For every woman who refused to be erased." And I stood there with one hand on the plaque and one hand on my keys, knowing I had become exactly who I was always meant to be, not forgotten, not bitter, free.